His name is George Riekers. Remember that name? He was famous for being one of the founders of the Family Research Council, one of the original super anti-gay conservative culture war groups that became very influential in Republican politics. In the 1980s, George Riekers was a founder of the Family Research Council. He specifically worked in the part of anti-gay politics that says that people can be cured of the gay. It can be reversed with just the right therapy. Well, by 2010, there was George Riekers being photographed at the airport in Miami in the company of a handsome young man named Lucien, who Mr. Riekers had apparently met on rentboy.com. Mr. Riekers first tried to explain that he had taken this handsome young man on an all-expenses-paid 10-day trip to Europe because he needed help with his luggage. The young man himself, seen here, not helping with the luggage, eventually explained exactly what he was paid for on that European trip, and George Riekers ultimately resigned from his job at the anti-gay organization. In 2004, when Republican President George W. Bush was up for re-election, the Republican Party and the Bush campaign enthusiastically promoted bans on same-sex marriage in multiple states. They expected that anti-gay campaigning in as many states as possible would goose Republican turnout and help Bush's chances of being re-elected. You demonize gay people, scare people about gay rights, you get conservative voters to turn out, and they'll vote Republican while they're there. Bush was reelected in 2004. Those anti-gay state ballot initiatives very well may have helped with that. But then 2 years after Bush left the White House, the man who had been chairman of the Bush campaign at that time came out himself as gay. And to his credit, he then set about trying to right the wrong he had been part of by persuading leading Republicans to change their mind on marriage equality. And to persuade the Supreme Court to support marriage equality, which they have done at least for a while. But honestly, it's like you can't swing a cat without hitting one of these guys. I mean, those anti-gay ballot initiatives that were supposed to help George W. Bush get reelected in 2004, they got a big boost in 2004 when a group called the National Association of Evangelicals, huge influential religious group, decided in 2004 that they would emphatically restate their opposition to homosexuality in all its forms, which effectively endorsed all the anti-gay measures that the Republicans were promoting all over the country in advance of the election that year. The National Association of Evangelicals at that time was led by this man, Ted Haggard, who soon treated the country to not at all uncomfortable headlines like this one. Quote, "Evangelist, I bought meth from gay escort." Again, I mean, follow the bouncing ball. He found himself a very handsome man, and it was never totally clear if he paid the handsome man for sex using the drugs as the method of payment, or maybe if he paid the man for the sex and the drugs together, kind of like a meal deal or something. But yeah, president of the National Association of Evangelicals. I got a million of these guys. Trump's Oklahoma state campaign chairman from 2016 was a Republican state senator who voted as an Oklahoma state senator that businesses should be able to put up signs that said, "We don't serve gays here." Trump's campaign chairman in Oklahoma in 2016, busted in 2017 for soliciting sex from exactly who you'd think he'd be doing that from. The Republican mayor of Spokane, Washington, supported banning gay people from working in schools. Later revealed to be meeting new friends all the time at gay.com. His handle was Cobra82. Because of course it was Cobra82. Sure. I could go on. Really, I got a million of them. How much time do you have? This weekend was the Conservative Political Action Conference. It's an annual right-wing conference thing. Among the things you can reliably get at CPAC every year is anti-trans rhetoric by the dump truck full, and anti-gay sermonizing as well. This year was no exception. It's like that every year. CPAC is run by a man named Matt Schlapp. It has been for years. And in 2022, ahead of the congressional midterms, Mr. Schlapp was in Georgia. He was campaigning for the Republican nominee for Senate, Herschel Walker. Remember Herschel Walker's Senate campaign? The Walker campaign sent one of their mid-level staffers, a male staffer, to drive Matt Schlapp around. While in the car, Matt Schlapp allegedly put his hand on the young man's leg and then, quote, moved his hand and began aggressively fondling the staffer's genital area in a sustained fashion without the staffer's consent. The staffer claims that Mr. Schlapp then invited the staffer to his hotel room. He declined. Early last year, that young man sued Matt Schlapp for sexual battery. And as that lawsuit has dragged on, more allegations of sexual misconduct against Matt Schlapp have come to light. As part of discovery in that sexual battery lawsuit, lawyers for the Republican campaign staffer discovered that in 2017 at a CPAC party, Schlapp allegedly attempted to kiss a male employee against his wishes. They also discovered that at a fundraising event in 2022, Mr. Schlapp was accused of stripping down to his underwear and, forgive me, rubbing against another person without his consent. Now, Mr. Schlapp, for his part, has denied all allegations of wrongdoing. The lawsuit says that the American Conservative Union, the parent company to CPAC, which employs Matt Schlapp, knew about at least 2 of the allegations against Schlapp before they become public. But the lawsuit claims that the American Conservative Union has not only failed to remove Mr. Schlapp from his leadership position, they also failed to pursue any kind of investigation into the claims of sexual misconduct. And so, given that failure to do anything about the allegations, the American Conservative Union has now been added as a defendant in the Matt Schlapp sexual battery lawsuit. The organization has thus far spent upwards of $1 million on Matt Schlapp's legal fees to defend himself in the sexual battery case. But they have meanwhile kept him in place to run the big annual anti-gay conference. Because sure, that's fine. Who will notice? For months and months, Republican lawmakers and conservative media have been trumpeting these bribery allegations made by Smirnov against President Biden and his family. The Washington Post today estimates that Fox News alone mentioned it more than 2,600 times over the past single year. Republicans in Congress pushed the allegation endlessly, even though the FBI explicitly warned them that the claim was uncorroborated and unreliable. And now the man who's the source of the allegation, the guy who said it, he's in jail, indicted for lying to federal investigators about this very matter, and accused by prosecutors of feeding the FBI disinformation from Russian intelligence, which would be shocking had we not lived through the last few years, because this, of course, is now the 3rd straight presidential election cycle in which Russian intelligence has done some version of this. In 2016, as you may have heard, Russian intelligence hacked the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. And then they weaponized the material they stole by releasing hacked emails through WikiLeaks, and all timed and strategically released to have maximum negative effect for Clinton and the Democrats and maximum positive effect for Donald Trump and the Republicans. And it was well known at the time that this whole thing was likely a Russian intelligence operation, but Trump and Republicans and conservative media and the mainstream media, frankly, mostly ate it up and pounced on every single email dump as if they had just come down on Mount Sinai on tablets rather than being shoveled by Russian intelligence into the garbage chute. Remember Trump talking at rallies about how much he loved WikiLeaks? He was welcoming it. He was asking for more. Russian government and Russian intelligence sources made multiple contacts with the Trump campaign. Russia ran a big, weird social media campaign to try to influence American public debate and public opinion in Trump's favor. The Trump campaign gave non-public polling information to a Russian intelligence agent, according to the Senate Intelligence Committee. The Russians had this hack and leak campaign with the Democratic emails. They were very busy in 2016 trying to help Trump. Then 4 years later, 2020, another try. This time, Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was peddling stories about Joe Biden's supposed corruption that he said he had dug up from his sources in Ukraine. Once again, it turned out that Giuliani's main source was Russian intelligence. A report from the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence later determined that Giuliani's source was part of a U.S. election interference operation, likely directed by Putin himself, with the goal of helping Trump win a second term in 2020. And once again, Republicans had been warned by American intelligence officials that the stuff that Giuliani was shoveling was likely part of a Russian op. They apparently just did not care. And again, this is not some obscure thing. I mean, people got sanctioned by the U.S. government for this. People got indicted by the U.S. Justice Department for this. But who cares? It might have helped Trump, so we went along with it as far as we could. And now, 4 years later, here we are again. They keep doing this every election cycle. They keep doing some version of the same thing. The Russians keep doing the same thing. What seems to be changing a little bit is that the Republicans appear to have fewer and fewer qualms each year about welcoming and even participating in these Russian campaigns. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times. I clearly want to be fooled, or maybe we should stop calling this foolish. This is something else. We did this in 2016. We did this in 2020. Now in 2024, Republicans appear to be more enthusiastic about participating in it than they ever have been before. But of course, now this Russian disinformation campaign trying to paint Biden as mired in some kind of bribery scandal, it's happening with American aid to Ukraine hanging in the balance, with this life or death question looming of whether Ukraine will be able to hold off a 3rd year of the Russian invasion. Russia is doing everything it can to undermine American support for Ukraine. And in the midst of a 3rd straight effort by Russia to influence our election to Republicans' benefit, Republicans, frankly, seem quite receptive both to that election interference and to what Russia wants them to do in cutting off Ukraine. These were adjacent headlines in the Washington Post last week. Biden administration cancels $1.2 billion in student loans with new repayment plan. Right next to Trump and allies planning militarized mass deportations, detention camps. Right? That's the choice, right? Right? Relief from high student loans or using the military to lock up millions of people in huge new camps. Adjacent headlines in the Washington Post on the same day. Both parties at the same point in general election campaigning, thinking about what they want to be doing to present to the American people about what their idea is of governing. And I don't know which of those two sides the American people is more in the mood for, but it seems pretty clear, to me at least, that the best contrast for the Democrats to draw for voters this year is maybe just the simplest one, right? Normal, popular, practical accomplishments from President Biden and the Democrats versus burn it all down radicalism being screamed at the top of their lungs by Republicans under Donald Trump. And you can't even understand what they're talking about half the time because they speak in their own code. Barbara McQuade, who you know and love from her time here as a legal analyst and explainer on MSNBC, she has a new book that comes out tomorrow. It's called Attack from Within: How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. And in her new book, among other things, Barb explains what she sees as the connection between disinformation, which is the fundamental basis for the book, and authoritarianism. Why you need to disconnect people from facts about the world, from the knowable truth in all its complexity, in order to get people to endorse extremism, to endorse extreme, new, radical changes, to reimagine their lives, and to reimagine their country in a way they've never thought of it before. Barb, in her book, talks about the need to hit people emotionally rather than logically. She talks about the sort of the utility of the would-be authoritarian leader or the authoritarian movement, focusing rhetorically on declinism, convincing people that the country is falling apart. The country used to be great, but it's no longer great. It's falling apart. It's a disaster. If you can convince people of that, they will have an emotional reaction about being afraid at the state of the country now. They'll have an emotional reaction about wanting to rescue the country. If they can be convinced that things are so far gone, they will then feel the need for extreme measures, for a strong man to come in. And, you know, maybe you got to wreck the place. Maybe you got to break the rules, but it's a kind of rescue mission for a country that is otherwise lost. And what that means in practical terms, in terms of actually running a political campaign that in a matter of months will supposedly pick a new president, what that means is every day making sure that your message undermines the idea of democracy and the idea of the rule of law. So, I mean, this isn't theory. This isn't academic. This is our lives now. Trump advisor Steve Bannon, who you just saw there yelling about vermin and trash at CPAC, he spent last week telling his podcast listeners that the Tom Suozzi election in Long Island was stolen. What? Yes. In Steve Bannon world, this was the story of last week. This is the special election to replace George Santos. There's no suggestion there was anything wrong with the count or anything wrong with the conduct of that election at all. But it doesn't matter. A Democrat won. And so therefore, Steve Bannon tells his acolytes and his followers that that election must have been stolen because a Democrat won and they should not respect the results of it. Even when it doesn't matter, when it's one special election for one congressional seat and there's no real controversy about it, still, you have to say elections don't count. Elections aren't real. Now, on top of that, we've got the Republican National Committee losing its chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel. She's being replaced summarily by a North Carolina Republican who is reportedly considered by Trump to be more solid, specifically on the issue of throwing out election results. Ms. McDaniel was no slouch on this issue herself, but apparently Trump wants somebody even stronger specifically on that point. He's a stop the steal guy. And so now he will be now running the RNC if Trump gets his way. And, you know, the politics of running against democracy, the politics of getting Americans to distrust elections and ultimately not want them anymore, that is inextricably intertwined with getting Americans to distrust the legal system, to not trust the courts and not trust the justice system anymore, to not take it seriously, to not obey its dictates, to not respect any of its rules. And Barb's book, more than anything, helped me see the connection of the connection between those 2 points, between getting rid of elections and getting rid of the rule of law. You have to get rid of the rule of law, right? You have to undermine and problematize it so that you can get away with what you are trying to do to elections. Right? And this is all over the news right now. Just on Friday, the Wisconsin Ethics Commission referred a Trump PAC and multiple Republican officials for felony prosecution for their role in a Wisconsin scheme to punish a Republican leader in the Wisconsin state legislature who Trump thought didn't fight hard enough to throw out the election results in that state. We want you to throw out those election results. You don't do a good enough job. We're now going to, allegedly, commit crimes in order to turf you out of your position. Recommended for prosecution as of Friday. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to throw out the sanctions, the professional sanctions against Trump lawyers Sidney Powell and Lin Wood for their efforts to overthrow the election results. Mike Lindell, Mike Pillow, last week he was ordered by a judge to pay up in a contest he held where he promised $5 million cash to anybody who could disprove his claims that a foreign government helped steal the election for Biden. Somebody did disprove those claims, and now a court says Mr. Pillow has to pay. He, of course, does not want to pay, but a court says he must. In Georgia, the right-wing group True the Vote that apparently ginned up all the false claims about supposed problems in the Georgia elections in 2020. They made hay with those claims for not just weeks around the election, but months and ultimately years. But when it got put through the legal system, they had to admit to a judge that no, they don't actually have any evidence to back up their claims that there was fraud in Georgia. Trump and multiple Georgia co-defendants are now going to go on trial for trying to overthrow the election result in Georgia, which they did by citing this fake evidence from this group, True the Vote. What will happen in that case? Will that case come to trial? Trump and his co-defendants' best hope is not their defense, but their unrelated personal counteroffensive to try to discredit and disqualify the prosecutor to get her thrown off the case. The rule of law is protecting democracy. We've got to get rid of the rule of law. Hypocrisy is like a cold, windy day in the winter. You don't love it, but it's not like you don't expect it. But what Barb McQuade is writing about in her new book, and what we are seeing from the campaign this year, is something that is not inevitable, but something planned, something systematic, and something very, very, very radical. The Democrats are campaigning against it by saying, we're doing normal politics, delivering normal practical results for real-world problems. The Republicans are promising to burn it all down. They have to undermine the idea of democracy and the rule of law in order to get to their end game.